and then they recover. So far, the swine flu is no different. It's not particularly virulent, nor is it deadlier than the strains commonly referred to as seasonal flu, although Mexican authorities initially thought it was for reasons that are not entirely clear. Viruses mutate, intermingle with other strains, and adapt, and the H1N1 flu is a new one, a zoonotic virus that has leapt from pigs to humans. So it's always possible that the swine flu could become a genuinely dangerous phenomenon, but so far there's no evidence to indicate that that's a likely scenario. In fact, researchers at the University of Maryland conducted a study that concluded that the swine flu is less likely to recombine with other strains, the Los Angeles Times reported. That the results should ease fears that the pandemic H1N1 influenza virus will mutate into a more lethal form. And if the swine flu H1N1 had hit just 10 short years ago, we would not have gone about our lives as if nothing was amiss. It's only due to stepped-up efforts to screen for viruses after the SARS and avian flu scares, and our relatively new ability to quickly and inexpensively determine viruses' genome that we know something other than the so-called seasonal flu exists at all. None of this has prevented the media from engaging in a full-blown Y2K-style panic. Every time a new case of flu is identified as being caused by the H1N1 strain, every time an unfortunate person dies of it, every time a public health official releases a new statistic about its spread, or a school is shut down, a media feeding frenzy has followed. Okay, the next article should be of concern to you if you live in the state of Washington. Health districts suspends mercury limits for H1N1 shots. Washington health officials have temporarily suspended limits on the amount of mercury allowed in the upcoming H1N1 influenza vaccine for pregnant women and children younger than 3 years old. The move comes after Health Secretary Mary Selecki was informed that the initial batches of vaccines against the swine flu may not include enough doses that were specially packaged without thimerosal, a mercury-containing preservative. The preservative is controversial among some people who believe that it may be linked to autism and other childhood disorders, but widely accepted and peer-reviewed medical studies have shown there is no harm caused by thimerosal. Selecki said the suspension is designed to ensure that pregnant women and children have access to the vaccines even though they may contain thimerosal. The swine flu vaccines will be available in early October while the seasonal flu vaccines are available now. Okay, one more swine flu story, and then I'll be done, I promise. This one is from Management in Practice. Swine flu prompts changes to Mental Health Act. This is from September 23rd of 2009. The government plans to rush through measures allowing people with suspected mental health issues to be quickly detained because of fears over staff shortages and any forthcoming swine flu outbreak, it has been revealed. The temporary changes to the Mental Health Act, as laid out in an unusually short consultation lasting just 1 month, would mean it would only take one doctor rather than two to have a person sectioned and put on medication without their consent. The measures could have a serious effect on the thousands of patients with psychiatric issues who currently live outside state care, meaning many could be detained against their will on the word of just one health professional. With very little information on the proposed changes published, many health experts have warned the government that they risk sidelining an already vulnerable community and have called on it to spell out the full raft of changes proposed in the consultation. And that's it.
To the United States now, the Obama administration has announced its support to renew 3 provisions of the U.S. Patriot Act, which expire at the end of the year. Introduced by George W. Bush following the 9/11 attacks, the act increased the powers of law enforcement agencies to fight terrorism. Now, RT's Priya Sridhar is in our Washington studio with more. Hello to you, Priya. Now, there's been a lot of public criticism, as I know, of this particular act due to its allegedly weakening the protection of civil liberties. Now, what do these provisions involve, and how does the Obama administration justify extending them now?
Thank you. Well, that's certainly something we're going to talk about in a little bit. But 8 years after the Patriot Act became law, Congress now has the power to either keep it, reform it, scrap it, or some combination of those tactics. Now, former President Bush signed the Patriot Act after 9/11 to help fight terrorism. The act essentially gives law enforcement agencies the power to look through people's phone records and emails for potential terrorist plots. But many people say that the Patriot Act is an invasion of their privacy and opens the door for abuses of power. But now, 8 years later, President Obama has told lawmakers that he wants to reauthorize 3 parts of the act that were set to expire later this year. Well, joining me to discuss this is legal analyst Nicole Cardell. Nicole, thank you so much for joining me. So I want to talk about what were those 3 parts of the act that were set to expire this year. What exactly did they say, and why do you think Obama decided to reauthorize them?
Well, there are 3 of the more troubling parts of the act. One of them talked about roving wiretaps. And essentially all of them, they lower standards for what the government needs in order to conduct their different searches. With the first one, it allows roving wiretaps to be approved by FISA Special Secret Court without having to really identify specific targets for this information. It allows review of business records, library records, medical records, without having to identify or go into specifics, which would normally be constitutionally required. And then finally, there's something, I think, the most controversial provision that he was talking about proceeding with and not letting it expire. It's called the lone wolf provision, in which you don't even have to identify specifics of why you think a particular person is worthy of being surveyed. You have sort of a nebulous concern about them. So they're really lowering the standards on constitutional protections.
And, you know, the Patriot Act was something that was very controversial, and Obama has spent a lot of time trying to distance himself from a lot of President Bush's policies. What is he trying to change now that he has the power to maybe reform some of the Patriot Act?
You know, I'll tell you, well, he promised during his campaign that he was going to look at the Patriot Act and trying to reinstitute protections for abuses of civil liberties. You know, he's not making any statements on that. However, the one good thing is that a few Democrats in the Senate have, in response to this pronouncement by the DOJ to continue with the Patriot Act, they've actually instituted something called the Justice Act to actually go through and set in some of those measures to protect civil liberties.
So is the Patriot Act constitutional?
You know what? I'd like to actually, if I could take 2 seconds to read the 4th Amendment of the Constitution. It says, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause. It goes on. But the probable cause part is what I'm really concerned about here, because the Patriot Act essentially is removing the requirement for investigations without probable cause. They're saying, look, you know, we can investigate based upon sort of more nebulous instincts that maybe there's a concern.
So was this surprising that Obama did decide to kind of reauthorize some of this act?
You know, I read some people are more on the progressive side on the response. Some people were pretty irritated, both, you know, conservatives who think that this is an abrogation of civil rights, and as well as on the left who are saying that he's not living up to his promises of change. You know, he's exercising executive powers like Bush did.
Well, it'll certainly be interesting to follow this story, and we'll be sure to keep you updated on it. But for now, back to you in Moscow.
Okay, now, today I was surprised and pleased to see that I had gotten a letter from my congressman, and I'm going to read it verbatim. It says, Dear Mr. Steele, that's me, thank you for contacting me to express your support for H.R. 1207, the Federal Reserve Transparency Act. I appreciate that you took the time to share your thoughts with me, and I am pleased we agree on this issue. As your U.S. representative, I understand that one of the biggest issues facing upstate families today is the cost of living and our economic future. I am disappointed that the health of our nation's financial institutions has come into question as a result of unscrupulous lending and mortgage practices preceded by years of inadequate regulation of the financial services industry. Government, led by Republicans and Democrats alike, has for too long abandoned any system of checks and balances to ensure accountability over loans and mortgages. Unfortunately, this country is now paying the price for mistakes of others, while millions